Welcome to Your Wealthy Self with me, Regina Martinelli. This show is about money and a whole lot more. Here we focus on you being able to expand your capacity for money, success, abundance, and inner wealth. For you to have what's important to you, both inside and out, so you can be your wealthy self. And today is one of those days where we will be talking about a whole lot more. Today, my guest is Meghna Majmudar, who is a founder of Power Fluency. Meghna believes it's an important moment to think about power and leadership and to create different approaches for both as our experience of the world gets more complex. Her expertise is in helping leaders of all types, especially firsts and onlys, meaning the first from your family or your community, of the only one like them in the room, or to do the inner work to build an authentic sense of power, authority, and leadership, and navigate the outer structures of their work and lives. I really wanted her to speak to us today, and also next week. We're going to do this in a two-part series, because as you can tell, there is so much that needs to be covered with this topic. So let's dive in. Meghna, hello and welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So excited to have you here today. And I apologize.
Here.
I've known you for years, and here I then get nervous about having you, and I, stumble over your last name.
It happens. It happens. It's 3 syllables. It's a lot.
Thank you. So first of all, Power Fluency. That is a really intense and powerful word. Tell us what you mean by that so that we can be on the same page with you.
Yeah. So a lot of my work. So for me personally, I have been thinking about power and leadership for a long time. And I think right now there's a lot of power literacy out there where people will say, oh, I'm in this kind of power structure. I think Brene Brown brought up power over, power with, power under, those types of dynamics. I think people are very used to language around power now, but it comes across as static. And what I realized was in my own personal experience, in the experience of my coaching clients, that there's actually a way to work with power that goes beyond literacy. It's being able to name the power dynamic you're in, but then being able to locate your own self in that dynamic and understand what that means, and then to choose differently in terms of whatever actions or strategies you want to take. And when we think about all of that together, that becomes power fluency. It allows for maximum flexibility, maximum choice for action when it comes to things around leadership and power and what's going on in the world.
Right. Oh, that's fantastic. So, and there's, again, so much to talk about, and I'm excited to flesh this out today and also in the next week. So tell us what inspired you to take this path, to come to this place, to start talking about this new conversation and in a new way, really.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of, I was living it for so long, and then I realized maybe others want some of this insight too. So my story is, kind of did the immigrant American dream kind of life path early on. My parents moved to the U.S. when I was about 5, almost 6. Grew up in that immigrant household and, socialized in a very specific way. And as soon as I hit sort of going to the Ivy League, I went to Harvard. And went into the professional work world here in the States, I realized, I don't think I know all the rules. In fact, I don't know all the rules. There are some dynamics I can't explain. And as I worked as a consultant, I was always drawn to leaders and what made them make decisions the way they did, what motivated people. So what motivated leaders, what motivates groups of people, you can have the right strategy, but what kind of gets in the way? actually making it happen? And so these were all questions, and I realized that no one is talking about power and how it's used. That actually there are some hidden dynamics around someone's own definition of power, definition of authority, and their own willingness to be a leader in a space.
Wow. Thank you. Can you give us some examples of how, of those, what you're talking about, like someone's own definition of power, their hidden definition, and not knowing?
Yeah. So from our training together, I don't know if you remember the exercises around complex equivalence
Mm.
of how we internally code other people's behavior. So you see someone's behavior on the outside, you use your internal calculations to code it. And so the exercise very easily is just finish a sentence fragment. And so kind of finishing the sentence fragment of power is, authority is, leadership is. And so this is an exercise I have done with hundreds of leaders. And what really surprised me was there are a lot of people with very negative views of power and authority, but more positive views of leadership. And so people have had very negative experiences of power and authority. For example, I remember I was coaching a Polish immigrant in France. He was an engineering leader, and like I asked him, it's like, do you see yourself as a leader? And he was just like, oh, like he's good at his job, but he didn't want to see himself as a leader. And so I did that exercise with him, and he just reflected the way he grew up. You didn't trust authority. He and his family did not trust the government that he grew up under. And so authority coded as negative and not trustworthy. The use of power coded as dominating. And so, kind of when we looked at that, it was just at that moment, he could locate himself as that young boy and then connect to who he was now as a man in his mid 30s or early 40s. And what did he want to do then? How did he want to use his own power and authority without those negative definitions that he grew up with? So that's what I mean of where people haven't spent time actually thinking, what does power and authority mean inside of me? And how does it connect to my leadership? Because many people want to see themselves as leaders, and they cannot hold that. To be a leader, I have to make difficult decisions. I may have to ask people to do things they don't want to do. I may have to withhold information that I cannot share right now. I may have to give some tough love and be more hierarchical than I would like to be. And so once you get much more comfortable with your own power and authority and being seen as a power or authority figure, all of a sudden your options for how you lead open up.
Wow. And it's so powerful because when you have more options in how you lead, you actually have more choice and more self-sovereignty and more alignment, right? Versus as you're speaking, going back to his younger, I don't know, 6-year-old kid or whatever it was, who's viewing authority figures a certain way and being trapped in that 6-year-old's version of themselves, and then seeing the world from that 6-year-old's diminished, constricted version. I bet that's really powerful when people start to see that and then realign. And especially coming from first and onlys, first in their family or being the only person in the room who was like they are, that must really add more complexities to it. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the classic example is I am raised in a South Asian family. And so South Asians, East Asian families, we tend to have a certain reverence for elders, or we're socialized in a way where you do not talk back to your parents.
Yeah.
But you don't. And what I noticed, say, in corporate America, or kind of more Western corporate environments, being able to ask questions of leadership and kind of be helpful or push the envelope gets rewarded. And so it's like, how do these rules that you grew up with all of a sudden aren't the rules that everyone else is playing by. And so it becomes about, ooh, okay, like, so I have another exercise, the rules of power exercise, where, I ask everyone to list what are the rules of power in your family, like what gets rewarded, what gets kind of acknowledged in your family. You know, it's helpful, or stays quiet. Whatever. Like, what are these rules of belonging? Or actually, what are your rules of power? And then how many of them are rules of belonging in your family? Of like stay quiet, or don't question, or that sort of thing. And so needing to see, like, actually the environment I'm in has different rules of power of, useful questioning, thoughtful questioning, data backed questioning of authority, or bringing your unique insights to bear. I think a lot of people, I see a lot of, especially I think women and person onlys, women tend to be person onlys in most corporate spaces. They can be the only one like themselves in the room. Oftentimes they might be, like the first from their family or community who's kind of living this life. And so it gets really confusing of, oh, I was socialized to want to be liked. And that's really not the rule of power of, actually, I need to focus on the decision that needs to be made, and kind of moving through that. So there's a little bit of correcting that difference of, okay, that's what I need in my family. And that's cool. That needs to just work in my family, and work has a different set of rules. So again, giving people the flexibility to choose between, am I working in my family or am I working at work?
Yeah, and then to distinguish that so you can actually make that choice. Because sometimes when you get back around your family, you can, I don't want to use the word triggered, but you almost regress to that younger version of yourself, because there's so much agreement amongst the siblings or parents or cousins or whoever who are like, we remember you as this is who you are. And you're in an environment of kind of no agreement for who your adult self is. Do they remember you from like the last time they really lived or spent time with you uh, on a more intense basis or more quantity basis? And yet you've changed so much. So it's great to see that, oh, that is that, versus over here in the corporate world is a different place. So let me ask you, I talk a lot about our, as you know, being an NLP master practitioner, is the patterns and the imprints we get from childhood. And then we start to go out into the world and track for re-experiencing those. Like I talk about, it's the hammer, the hammerhead, from hit on the head by hammer as a little child. You get out of your house, whether it's literally or figuratively, your system starts to sort for that hammer hitter again, whether it's in bosses, relationships, neighbors, or roommates, to re-experience that, because in your system, that part of your brain knows you're alive. Do you see, with those kind of patterns, when someone comes from that household and they go into the corporate world, they then sort for bosses or boards or people that they work for who represent all of that? So they're first and onlys, and then they're also bringing that imprint and recreating it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm smiling because I did that for the longest time. So I'll explain. One of the things I say, like, I know I've gotten to a certain place in coaching someone because I will say this line to every client. For the first 20 to 30 years of our careers, we are just constellating our family into our workplace. The roles of mom, dad, the weird uncle, the weird aunt, the annoying cousin, they're all being played by different actors, but they're all being played.
So true.
And so for me, so I grew up with a pretty overwhelmed and stressed out mom that I experienced as very angry. Yeah, and so for me, my first definitions of power are it's angry and something to be scared of. And so when I wanted to feel powerful, I would use my anger to feel my power.
Mm.
And that really wasn't received well.
Yeah, you think?
Like, I know I put it mildly, it was not received well. And that was a moment where I really had to like unpack that of, yo, anger, screaming at people. And I had so many bosses that had that screaming, angry, blamey energy. And I had to really kind of come back and say, what in this pattern needs to be complete. Of letting, as, as we do in NLP world, letting that younger self grow up, letting our internal, whoever we code as internal mom, also grow up, also have the current version and the past version come together. Yeah.
So I'm curious because this is where I love this kind of deeper work is when you say that you realize that yelling did not go well or being angry did not go well, yet you were trying it and trying it. Could you tell a story from your personal experience of when you realized, oh, this isn't going well, and then saw that there was another option, and what was it like to step into that?
Well, I think so. So it happened over a couple of years. So, it really kind of my first role as a consultant back when I lived in New York. I'm using this anger as a way to lead. I'm like cringing when I think about some of the things that left my mouth in those years. And very kind of swiftly, the company was going through a bit of difficulty. I ended up being laid off as they merged with a larger organization, and I thought so that was kind of the first chink in the armor of like I had gotten negative feedback from many of the other leaders at that company, and then I was laid off, and so there was a way in which like that kind of broke me in a
Yeah.
certain way. And then the next role I had was with a very angry boss.
Mm.
And I was just like, yo, this is not okay. This is actually something I need to work on. And it's at that point that I first found coaching and found someone who is grounded in NLP Marin style NLP work. And it gave me some different tools to listen, to understand, and that sort of thing. So I don't like, I hope that's specific enough of, it took me like, I realized something was wrong. I got the feedback and then I got to experience it on the outside and then got to, as difficult as my relationship with that second boss was, I do look to him as a teacher and just kind of like I really appreciate that he turned the volume all the way up on certain behaviors that had been there in previous bosses of not listening to me, undervaluing my contributions, all these things, but they were turned all the way up with a side of anger. And I still remember there were moments where I just hold the phone like away from my ear and people could still hear. And so it was a pretty jarring thing to realize like, hey, I'm an adult. He's an adult. We don't have to play this game.
Yes. And then bringing your adult self to the conversation versus that younger child, for whatever reason, has a different belief that she's trying to be, seen or yelled or trying to get across from a child's perspective with childlike ways, right? When your child gets upset, they're screaming, yell, and they're really trying to say, I don't want to do that, or I don't want this.
Yeah, and I think more and more over the last few years where I've actually been working with an actual therapist, there's a way to kind of look at all of that. So I think the NLP work has been really profound in helping me see patterns and know where things are stored and where the skeletons are. And so that's been great. And because of my own experiences, I kind of am able to see my clients in a certain way because I know where their skeletons are. I know how to ask questions around those things. And so, I think as we so now what therapy really allowed, like on top of the NLP, is just that more abiding adult voice to come through stronger with more love, less judgment, over and over again.
That's awesome. So touching back in this, and thank you for sharing this, is, all of us go through things like this in our own ways, and it's great to hear from someone like you who's so successful and is really bringing this forward as a thought leader to see where you've been. Because it makes us realize we can we can bring more choice to our life too, and bring our adult selves to the conversation instead of being at the mercy of that wounded child where it's kind of like throwing a tantrum inside this adult body, even though we may not be screaming or throwing ourselves on the floor, but we don't know how to calm it down because the intensity of the emotions are so big. Because there's something so primal that little one needed and felt they needed for their survival that they weren't getting, that our adult person is really feeling the symptoms, right? So this is such a great conversation. And so I want to ask you, where do you feel or think that modern culture kind of misleads women in this area? What the big lie is from society that we buy into that disempowers us around this topic?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. And I think there are so many ways, so many different answers. But as I sat with it and kind of went down to like, what is the core? So there is a kind of double bind that I think modern women, so kind of, like Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, especially, but this was always going on. We are told as we're growing up, you can be whatever you want to be. But we are socially conditioned with the belief that women are less than or worse than men. And somehow being a woman is inferior to being inferior to being a man. Being a man is superior. And so we all go out into the world. We can be anything we want. And so we don't see when actually there is bias and discrimination against us. We're like, oh, maybe we need to get another degree. Maybe I need to try harder. Maybe I need and then there's just this like unending burnout cycle when it's actually, I can be anything I want to be, and certain things will have much higher and steeper climbs.
Steeper what?
Climbs to do that. Mm-hmm. And so what's the equipment I need? What are the mental tools? What's the kind of community I need to make this goal happen? And so I think there's that lie of like, and it is unconscious of, if we see it in the numbers of kind of women in leadership roles, the difference in the pay gap, all of that stuff, there is just unconscious bias, around kind of women's contributions being discounted in the workplace. So, if we apply power fluency to this, of kind of understanding that, okay, I live in this kind of world. How do I locate myself? And understand what are the challenges? What are those steep grades that I'm going to need to plan for?
Yeah. And I love that because it's also when you said like what kind of resources, tools, and community am I going to need? It's also about realizing that we don't have to do it by ourselves. Does it make us less capable, less valuable, there's no less status. We're not less than because we need help, because we need community resources and team to get us where we want to go, because none of us do it alone. I mean, I didn't make my own clothing. I don't grow my own food. I didn't build my own car. None of us get through life doing it all by ourselves, all alone. And there's not a bigger ribbon or a taller trophy or a shinier lapel pin that says you did it all by yourself.
Exactly. Exactly. So the lie is you can be anything, but women aren't as good as men, and actually you should do it alone to really prove how good you are. So none of all of that is an equation for very unhappy women in my book. But if we kind of came from you can be anything, and there are some challenges you're going to face. So let's make sure that you equip yourself, you connect yourself, you feed yourself, you nourish yourself for a long game. Then all of a sudden it becomes a very exciting game to play.
Yes. Thank you, Meghna. We are out of time for this episode, but just to everyone out there, we are going to continue with Meghna. We're going to do a second part to this because there's so much more that we want to dig into and look at. So one of the things, if you have questions you want to share, please send them to yourwealthyself@e360tvlive.com. And we will see you next week. Bye.